When we think of the Victorian era, we imagine opulence as seen in period dramas, voluminous crinolines and hoop skirts, luxurious fabrics, top hats, walking sticks, and neatly clipped pocket watches. Paintings illustrate ornate designs everywhere, in the lush carpets, Italianate-style houses, and romantic cupolas. These luxuries are seen topped by sweeping floral motifs, intricate carvings, bronze statues, gables, mahogany furnishings, and fine china. Beneath the grandeur, daily Victorian life was quieter, smaller, and surprisingly more familiar to us. Away from the palatial manners, in small terraced houses, families weren't preparing for ball dances. They kept notebooks where they tracked every loaf of bread, every candle, and every lump of coal. Magazines turned thrift into literature. The Family Economist published model budgets for clerks on £150 a year, prescribing exactly how pennies should be stretched across bread, coal, rent, soap, and postage. Mrs. Beeton's Englishwoman's Domestic magazine published practical household advice like how to manage on £200 a year, and apparently sold 60,000 copies in its first year. More magazines, such as Eliza Warren's Ladies' Treasury, included articles like Cookery for All Incomes and How I Managed on £200 a year, presenting thrift as aspirational. Books like Cookery for Maids of All Work and Comfort for Small Incomes offered helpful tips on managing modest middle-class homes. And churches set up penny banks, where workers deposited coins in locked boxes in front of piers. A clerk was not measured just by his coat, but by the neatness of his household ledger. Respectability clinked in the coins not spent. Soap weighed against tea, coal against candlelight. This was the economy of appearances, a moral order built out of thrift. Overspending meant not only financial danger, but social disgrace. Debtors' prisons loomed, yes, but so too did gossip, whispers, the invisible court of neighbours.
Fast forward 2 centuries, and another generation sits before screens with the same intent as clerks once sat with their ledgers. Gen Z does not dip a quill but swipes between apps, color codes expenses into Notion dashboards, Etsy trackers, looking for the budgeting apps, promising financial clarity. Gen Z budgeting tips circulate online, from envelope systems to loud budgeting trends that make private arithmetic public. Reddit threads like r/povertyfinance and r/budget echo the letters to the editor of Victorian magazines. Strangers publish their income and expenses down to the last oat milk latte, and commenters discuss how to make it through the month within their own pay equivalent of $200. These confessions don't just reveal the spending habits of Gen Z, but also their need to test choices against a wider audience, not to seek approval, but to extend support, and make shared money problems feel communal instead of individual. Rent, groceries, subscriptions, and Uber rides make the numbers vanish as quickly as a Gen Zer earns them. Budgeting is no longer about respectability, but about survival. Embarrassment doesn't lie in overspending, but in admitting how little remains once exhausted by the bills. Financial anxiety in Gen Z is now a cultural condition, expressed in memes as much as in spreadsheets. And yet, the theater persists. It is tempting to wave off a simple beverage practice as irrelevant, aesthetics wrapped around numbers that refuse to add up. Yet they reveal something deeper, the human instinct to turn scarcity into a shared culture.
Victorian penny pinching was born of the Industrial Revolution, as wages, for many, stretched thin against the pressure of urban growth. Gen Z faces its own mismatches in the gig economy, with stagnant pay and rising costs of living. Some Gen Zers turn to methods like zero-based budgeting, where every dollar is assigned a role, leaving nothing idle. It is the same instinct that once divided coal from candles, where nothing was wasted, everything was disciplined. Both generations elevated thrift into a lifestyle and faced similar moral policing for taking pleasures in things as trivial as a beverage. The 19th century thrift manuals and magazines tried to establish thrift as a virtue. Excessive tea drinking was scolded as the latte factor of the day. Medical and social commentators warned against excessive tea drinking among the working classes, framing it as wasteful or even harmful. In the 21st century, the latte plays the same symbolic role. It is mocked by some as frivolous, while others inflate it into a budget breaker. Both Victorian budgeting and Gen Z budgeting turn arithmetic into identities. Both turn survival into self-representation. And both echo a refrain. For Victorians, respectability at risk. For Gen Z, a quieter anxiety, dressed instead as relatability. Even the modern obsession with how to save carries an old echo of the endless question, how to stretch your paycheck.
Victorian manuals and model budgets frame small economies as a sign of whether a household was living within its proper station. Saving promised the possibility of modest mobility, though more often it kept families tied to the same narrow rung, just kept them slipping lower. Gen Z budgets within a system that feels unyielding. Trends like loud budgeting signal frustration and a desire for transparency. But more often, thrift is a practical negotiation with stagnant wages, rising rents, and debt. The theater is different, yet the constraints are familiar. Seen side by side, the penny pincher's ledger and the Gen Z budgeter's dashboard tell the same story in different dialects. Scarcity demands not only management, but meaning. Numbers must be narrated, dressed, turned into ritual. However, cultural analysts note value-driven shopping habits defining Gen Z. They may cut subscriptions, but they'll pay more for brands they perceive as ethical or authentic. The act of budgeting here is not only financial, but curatorial, a way of signaling identity through consumption.
Victorian thrift was harsh, often joyless, and carried virtue signaling. But beneath the sermons, there are lessons that still carry weight. The first is discipline in the smallest things. A household ledger trained people to see where money slipped away, a habit modern tools can replicate only if used with the same diligence. A Notion dashboard or the best budgeting apps mean little unless filled with the same meticulous honesty that once went into ink and paper. The second is ritual. The Victorians made savings social through penny banks in parish halls, model budgets in magazines, and the advice columns dissecting every shilling. Today's equivalent might be joining communities that share Gen Z budgeting tips, following TikTok tutorials, or reading blogs about the spending habits of Gen Z. The medium has changed, but the principle remains. Money habits stick better when they are public and witnessed.
What Gen Z can take from the Victorians is their precision and their rituals. What they must refuse is the weight of judgment. If there is to be an art of endurance now, it should point not to obedience, but to freedom. A way to reduce financial anxiety in Gen Z, to resist constant precarity, to choose rest and flexibility over burnout. They can lean on methods like zero-based budgeting, which assigns every dollar a job, echoing the Victorian obsession with detail, but freeing it from the social pressures. They can experiment with digital rituals that balance thrift with value-driven shopping habits, choosing purchases that align with ethics as much as price. They can use strategies that teach them how to stretch their paycheck, where the latte factor becomes less about cutting joy, more about deciding which joys are worth their price.
If thrift carries echoes across centuries, so do its traps. The Victorians tied money to morality, and although Gen Z rejects that equation, the search for approval remains. Budgets shared online still seek validation, and the self-deprecating "I'm broke" memes still signal a desire to belong. Wanting to belong is not a bad thing, but making it the motivation is. Another unlearned lesson is rest. Victorian critics warned against indulgences like tea, casting them as wasteful luxuries. Today, the same logic reappears in latte factor advice. Joy is trimmed first, and leisure is postponed. A budget becomes not liberation, but another form of self-subjugation. Both generations mastered the performance. What neither tells is the act that comes after. The missing script is not another ledger or dashboard, but a budget that answers to life instead of morality or performance. Not just how to endure, but how to live. That means choosing one thing to cut without remorse, a subscription you never use. One thing to save without guilt, an automatic transfer, however small. And one thing to spend on with joy, a meal with friends, a class, a train ticket. 3 lines. Not a morality play, a direction. In the end, thrift is more than arithmetic. It is a theater that gives meaning to scarcity. The Victorians staged it in ledgers and penny banks. Gen Z reenacts it in dashboards and memes. What changes is the set, not the story. The challenge now is whether we can let the performance lead up to more than endurance, to lives that are not only managed, but lived.